So that's 3 eyewitnesses plus Cheney himself confirming that Cheney was there before the Pentagon was hit. Of course, the White House photographer and the Vice President gave these accounts before the Mineta testimony to the 9/11 Commission. Also, Condoleezza Rice and the Commission claimed that she arrived there shortly after Cheney. It would be an extremely narrow window for Rice to arrive after Cheney after 9:58, and yet all of them are there for the photograph at 9:59 of the World Trade Center collapsing. There is no way she had all those conversations with Clark and the principals within those seconds. Dick Cheney and Lee Hamilton are liars, no shock there, and the 9/11 Commission would delete Norman Mineta's testimony from their video archives. However, we recorded it from C-SPAN. It wasn't just moles in the State Department and DoD impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11 suspects. The FBI was impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11. It's a stretch, but one could still claim that maybe they're just trying to cover up for their embarrassing failure and screw-ups to save face. Except that there is absolutely no rationalization in the world to explain why the FBI went to Ames, Iowa and destroyed all the Ames anthrax samples. I'll let you hear the words of Francis Boyle from an interview on Boiling Frogs, the man who drafted the Biological Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989, Harvard Law professor, etc. And I have never talked to this man, but he is coming up with the same conclusion.
Get an updated list from the CIA. And he said, well, we were working with people at Fort Detrick on this matter. And I said, well, Fort Detrick could very well be the problem here, not the solution. Soon thereafter, within a few weeks, the FBI authorized the destruction of the United States government's collection of Ames strain anthrax maintained out in Ames, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And that I was originally hired here to teach criminal law. That clearly was an obstruction of justice. That you would be able to take those Ames strains and reconstruct precisely who was involved in this attack. So it became very clear to me that the FBI, right from the get-go, was involved in a cover-up here of who really was behind the anthrax attacks. Basically, the FBI has been lying about it and covering it up. I don't believe Ivins did it. Even the people who work with him don't believe he did it. And by the way, I should also point out, Bowman was the same FBI guy who sabotaged the request by the FBI agents in Minneapolis, Rowley and the rest of them, to get a subpoena into Moussaoui's computer. He was the exact same guy.
That's right.
And Bowman had been ordered by someone to sabotage that subpoena into Moussaoui's computer. The argument that the FISA court, there wasn't enough evidence, that is total baloney. If you study everything about Moussaoui, there was more than enough evidence for the FISA court to issue a FISA warrant into his computer. Later on, then, Bowman was promoted and given an award. If we find out, who was really behind the anthrax attacks, perhaps we'll find out who really was behind 9/11.
The anthrax is key. This connected Iraq to Al-Qaeda, and it's the reason many well-intentioned Americans signed up to fight Iraq, believing that they attacked America.
But here you have the Johnny Appleseed of terrorism wandering the country with his little sack of anthrax. 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 Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax bacterium.
Anthrax bacterium.
Anthrax investigation. Anthrax Anthrax investigation.
Anthrax exposure.
Anthrax exposure. Anthrax tests. Anthrax tests. With anthrax scares.
Anthrax scares.
Anthrax spores. Anthrax spores. Anthrax strains. Anthrax strains. Anthrax hoax.
Anthrax hoaxes. Anthrax attack.
Anthrax attacks.
Cases of anthrax.
Anthrax case.
Anthrax cases and traces.
Traces of anthrax.
Traces of anthrax.
Traces of anthrax. Skin anthrax.
Skin anthrax.
Cutaneous anthrax.
Cutaneous case of anthrax.
Inhaled anthrax.
Inhaled anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax. Inhalation anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax.
Anthrax in the mail.
Anthrax through the mail.
Anthrax tainted letters. Anthrax tainted letters.
Anthrax laced letters.
Anthrax laced letters. Anthrax letters. Anthrax letters. Anthrax letters. Anthrax letters.
Presence of anthrax. No presence of anthrax.
Positive for anthrax.
Negative for anthrax.
Negative for anthrax.
Positive for anthrax.
Also has anthrax.
But not anthrax.
I don't have anthrax.
He does not have anthrax.
No anthrax.
Crop dusted Omaha with anthrax. Mass spreading of anthrax.
Mutant anthrax.
Deadly anthrax. Kill any anthrax.
Anthrax fighting drug. Antibiotics.
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 Antibiotics. Anthrax vaccine.
Smallpox vaccine.
That's right, he said smallpox.
Smallpox vaccine.
That's right, he said smallpox.
Back to anthrax. Cure for anthrax.
Die from anthrax.
Cure for anthrax.
Die from anthrax.
This was the ammo the U.S. used to frighten its own Congress and scare the United Nations. One must remember at this time, the mass media had the public whipped up into a frenzy, scrambling for duct tape and storing food supplies. The press made an attack seem imminent, and the sloganeering for jack-off missile Johnny Tice became, "We gotta get them over there before they get us here." Colin Powell made his case to the UN while using a vial of mock anthrax.
Secretary of State Colin Powell will make the case for war
1 to 4 weeks.
in a speech to the United Nations.
We also have satellite photos that indicate that banned materials have recently been moved from a number of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction facilities.
Powell will put America's credibility and his own on the line.
So he came through the door that morning and he had in his hand a sheaf of papers, and he said, "This is what I've got to present at the United Nations according to the White House, and you need to look at it."
Colonel Larry Wilkerson, Colin Powell's longtime friend and advisor, was his chief of staff.
It was anything but an intelligence document. It was, as some people characterized it later, sort of a Chinese menu from which you could pick and choose.
At the CIA, Powell and his aides questioned, point by point, the menu of charges drafted by the White House.
There was no way the Secretary of State was going to read off a script about serious matters of intelligence that could lead to war when the script was basically unsourced.
For 4 days and 4 nights, in the conference room next to Tennant's office, they argue over the intelligence.
Secretary Powell asked a lot of questions, expressed skepticism about some, was reassured about others. If he was deeply skeptical, it came out. If we were deeply skeptical, it came out.
And then he turned to the DCI, Mr. Tennant, and he said, everything here, you stand behind. And Mr. Tennant said, "Absolutely, Mr. Secretary." And he said, "Well, you know you're going to be sitting behind me tomorrow. You're going to be sitting right behind me, in camera."
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
For more than an hour, Secretary Powell displays photos, holds up a chemical vial that suggests anthrax, shows slides, all to make dozens of claims about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction.
I am no expert on centrifuge tubes, but just as an old Army trooper, I can tell you a couple of things.
Every single thing we knew was thrown into that speech. This is all we got, and we're making these firm judgments.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents.
He makes a dramatic accusation. Saddam has bioweapons labs mounted on trucks that would be almost impossible to find.
We have first-hand descriptions of biological
In fact, Secretary Powell was not told that one of the sources he was given as a source of this information had indeed been flagged by the Defense Intelligence Agency as a liar, fabricator.
To find even one of these 18...
Powell was also not told that the prime source, an Iraqi defector codenamed Curveball, had never been debriefed by the CIA.
Maybe the name of the agent wasn't alarming enough. Maybe it should have been Screw Up, or, you know, a lying sack of manure, something like that. But, you know, to know that you're giving the president a ticket to go to war based upon one source, at that point you want to drag the source in and talk to him yourself.
Curveball is a case of utter irresponsibility and a good example of how decayed the intelligence process has become.
The day before Powell's speech, a CIA skeptic had warned about the defector's reputation as a liar. In an email reply, his superior acknowledges the problem, but adds, "This war is going to happen regardless. The powers that be probably aren't terribly interested in whether Curveball knows what he's talking about."
The United States will not and cannot...
Powell was not told about the email.
Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option. Not in a post-September 11th world.
The speech would turn out to be riddled with misleading allegations, but at the time, the press plays it as an overwhelming success.
He had walked into my office musing, and he said words to the effect of, I wonder how we'll all feel if we put 500,000 troops into Iraq and march from one corner of the country to the other and find nothing.
"I will forever be known as the one who made the case," Colin Powell now says. "I have to live with that."
I look back on it and I still say this is the lowest point in my life. I wish I had not been involved in it.
March 19th, 2003. The aerial bombardment of Iraq begins. It is the first preemptive war on this scale in U.S. history.
Interestingly, the bogus speech Powell was suckered into delivering was originally written up by none other than Cheney's chief of staff and plain scandal fame and convicted criminal Louis Libby. The speech was rewritten by George Tenet, which is about like crawling out of the pot and into the kettle. The neocons assured Powell of its sources and evidence to back up the claims, and Powell, in one evening, ruined his years of hard-earned credibility by trusting them. This anthrax attack and its associated claims, which led to a war, was not an act done in a bubble. This was a carefully calculated event. This was not just some individual trying to profit. The war, the Patriot Act, and the Department of Homeland Security greatly relied on this event. The History Channel will now admit that the anthrax was U.S.-made and came from inside.
Within weeks, 5 would be dead and thousands of others exposed to one of the deadliest bacteria known to man.
There are very few people who have the bench skills to make a product this good.
Federal investigators discovered clues to the perpetrator's identity encoded in the bacterium itself.
There are 89 different types of anthrax, but each one has its own kind of trail. This one led directly back to our own defense establishment.
Was the U.S. government hiding a terrorist inside America's biodefense community? Some say yes, and that the official government investigation was a sham.
The only people who know anything about the subject are also the suspects.
They're protecting this individual.
What we're dealing with here is an inside job with a real insider who has secrets that nobody wants to get out. It's going to be too humiliating, too embarrassing.
All the spores were sent for immediate forensic testing. By the 10th of October, the analysis of the spores was complete. The results were horrifying. The bacterium that killed Robert Stevens and eventually infected 7 of his colleagues was identified as the Ames strain, a strain long favored by and under the near total control of the U.S. biodefense program.
In August 2008, finally a member of the mass media, Keith Olbermann, admits and clarifies for the public that the anthrax was not from Al-Qaeda.
Evening. This is Friday, August 1st, 95 days until the 2008 presidential election. To that topic presently. First, if reporting by the Los Angeles Times today is even remotely accurate, the questions about the anthrax attacks, which terrified this nation late in 2001, would seem tonight to have boiled down to three. First, was the anthrax sent by just one employee of our own government or more than one employee of our own government? Second, when the FBI